Sir, Honorable Resource Person Dr.Madhumita Majumder, my colleagues here, and of course my dear students. By now, you all know why we are here today at this hour. We are here to listen to the memorial lecture, Shorendranath Haldar Memorial Lecture, which was instituted in the name of our late founder principal, Shorendranath Haldar. As you know, that teaching learning doesn't mean that you just read your textbooks or you memorize certain answers and then you write your examinations, get marks, and then you are an educated man. Teaching or learning is not limited to this. It is beyond this memorizing, writing answers, and for us delivering lectures. So the aim of instituting this Shorendranath Haldar Memorial Lecture is exactly this, that we get to learn much more than what we read in the texts. And you know that today's presentation will be based on Shakespeare. And Shakespeare is immortal, evergreen, and words are not adequate to sum up Shakespeare. So we are all waiting patiently. We have been waiting patiently for this session today. And on behalf of the college, on behalf of the Department of English, I extend a warm welcome to you, Madhumita. And I hope that our session is going to be a real interesting and productive one. Thank you once again. And with that, we shall go on to the lecture presentation.
Here is somebody who makes us smarter. Now they did a kind of a mapping where they looked at the sounds, meanings, and the emotions that the words of Shakespearean plays or sonnets would do to us. And they said that there is something, when they did this MRI scan, the brain MRI scan, they said there was something that lighted our brains the moment such words were told. Words that were taken from the Shakespearean plays. And of course, they say that our brains literally recognize that understanding Shakespeare is an accomplishment. And this is scientifically proven in that way. Reading Shakespeare, perhaps today, this is what resonated with me, that it makes us more emphatic. The emotional quotient, let's say, becomes much more. Once again, this was the researchers at the New School, NYC, who in 2013 conducted a literary fiction workshop where they got performers and they made a kind of an empathy test. And you were given passages from the plays of Shakespeare to read, and they found this made people more empathic. It also strengthens our memory, especially the way that Shakespeare uses the iambic pentameter, the blank verse that we see, makes memorizing easy. And therefore, it is a kind of an exercise that the brain delights in. And lastly, Shakespeare makes you smarter. I would love to believe that. But more than the word smarter, I think we can use the word vocabulary. The words that he had introduced to us, it sort of increases our connection between words and thought. You can say anything, but is it making me think something? Like say to be or not to be. That word or that phrasing. The words were there, but it is a thought, and this is something which has prepared us to think. So therefore, to begin with, the world that Shakespeare was performing in was primarily an all-male stage. My first contention would be that Shakespeare was somebody who was also talking about gender. He was talking about, not gender issues I would say, but he was talking about the ability that a woman can have. And how was it happening? And this was a performative work. And we said we do know that very young boys would actually be the performers on stage. They would be doing the women characters. But then this antagonists boys, who would, exclude a very important part of Shakespeare, SQUE. You could take them to the little performances. There the women would also be performers. But is there something that, gets revealed in this particular work? But that is where the rewriting or the reworking or the information actually comes. Now, 1570 would be a very versatile word. We know this is Renaissance. And where does this English Renaissance really come from? Italian Renaissance. So how was Italian Renaissance impacting the English stage? Or is it that, it was just not there? It was there. So you would have, let's say, strong, bold, charismatic women characters who were becoming part of not only Shakespearean plays, but even of Marlowe, even of Thomas Gate. How were they happening? So there would be, Italian troops, and there would be women performers. They would be traveling. So compared to, let's say, the male or the young boys, these women characters were taking much more risks. They were traveling geographical regions. And there is one word that you could associate with them, that is inamorata, assessa, which means somebody with inflamed passion. The woman and passion, conventionally in history, has been equated with madness. But then this passion was also being used with intelligence. How was this being used? So suddenly you would have heroines on stage who would be hot-blooded, who could take decisions, and they would be very Italianated in their opinion. Apart from the dresses, if you look at the character of Dido in Marlowe's The Tragedy of Dido, or if you look at the character of Belenperia in Keats's Spanish tragedy. So you would see that these characters were different from the kind of conventional English women that you would see. If I move to Juliet in Romeo and Juliet, if I talk about, let's say, Beatrice in Much Ado About Nothing, or most significantly about Portia in The Merchant of Venice. So these were women who were definitely, prodigious, and perhaps one female actor, I would rather prefer the word actor today, who I can mention here, Isabella Angiani, and there would be, Diana Poyante, and there would be Vittoria Piscini, and many others, but Isabella is the one that I'm talking about. Skilled performers, and what would be most important would be, apart from their beauty and intelligence, there would be plays where I am talking about women's choices, I'm talking about their desires. Here, I am tempted to talk about the play Measure for Measure. Maybe, if I talk about the character of Isabella, she is perhaps the conventional English woman. But what happens towards the end of it? And this is where performance comes in. Isabella, when the Duke would say that, I wish to marry this girl, and sort of declare it as a kind of a gift that is being given to her. She who had wanted to join the nunnery. So therefore, conventionally, for a woman wanting to join nunnery was not, a happy situation. She was doing it out of, exclusion, alienation, and of course marriage did not happen. But this was a choice that she was making. So what Shakespeare did was, he made Isabella turn towards the audience even as the Duke is talking. So she's not turning towards the Duke, the expected not. And she's turning towards the audience, and that is a question that the audience must answer. Is the Duke doing the correct thing? Because he is not asking me that whether I wish to marry him. So a simple gesture is doing a lot. So, you could see these actresses, who would be of the courtesan classes, their education would be very different. But when it came to the stage, they would be, regal women, full of enigma and of course of charisma that would be there. So a few of them, I was talking about Isabella because of her ability to inspire, the audience, make the audience respond. She would be allowed into an all-male academy where she would be writing poetry. Okay, so therefore, this idea of this woman, the woman as a performer, could be found in the comic, in the pastoral, in the tragedy, but then what is important is the diva. So the idea of a diva, somebody who is intelligent, somebody who is not accessible and has an aura of one's own. And what is important, you should have that these characters would talk in Tuscan. I would talk about this Tuscan attitude because there would be witticism. If you remember, passages from Portia in Merchant of Venice, the way, where, let's say you have a character like Shylock who cannot be denied that pound of flesh. Why can he not be denied? Because Venice happens to be a free port, and therefore, according to this policy, the law was such way that everyone in Venice, including the people who did business there, should be given equal rights. So this was a document that had been signed, it was a kind of a legal document. And therefore there is no way that the Venetian court, in spite of their sympathy, they could not deny things to Shylock. And here was Portia talking their language and talking business. So who is then the merchant in Merchant of Venice? Antonio? How can you even call him a merchant? He puts his money in one business, he doesn't have business sense, and he doesn't have money basically because he asks and tells his friend, go and borrow it in my name. So he could be somebody who is kind-hearted. But then business and Antonio does not go together. Somebody who is doing business is Shylock. But then you are trying to, demean him because of his Jewish identity. But ultimately who speaks business and does business sense is Portia, who also prevents the money that she has inherited from her father being squandered away by somebody like Bassanio. And what is Bassanio doing in the court? He says, okay, Shylock, for 1 ducat, I give you 2 ducats. Basically, I give you 6 ducats, but whose money is he giving away? So therefore, that is not business. So, this kind of strong women, women opinionated who had, the ability to talk back, was coming from, from a different area altogether. These Italian women performers who were bringing with them this kind of a diva-like attitude. So even, they would sing laments, they would, be doing soul fighting. But then what happened when on the English stage, you wouldn't have these women performers, but you would have these young boys. You now know where this cross-dressing comes from. You would have to have women who are opinionated, who can express themselves, because that is what these Italian traveling actresses have done. So therefore, as commercial playwright, Shakespeare was one of them. He needed to go by what was the flow of the time. So therefore, have such women characters. So you would have Rosalind, who would enjoy making this small play. She takes her own time. She decides when she will reveal herself to her own father. So it is nobody else which declares. So if there is anyone, going by that game as you like it, it is Rosalind. So if you have, if you look at Cleopatra, Antonio and Cleopatra, the kind of, glory and fame, that kind of, the Cleopatra image, somebody who's like, almost diva-like, once again, very Italian, you would have that. One of the most striking scenes, I'd say Passion and Madness, one of the major, hallmark of this actress Isabella Wood, that when she would be doing these mad scenes, she would be turning her head a full tilt, and that would create, a kind of a furrow, a kind of a feverish attitude, and therefore, the need to, capture this, this performance, this Caesar of the mad woman. So you have mad women throughout, from Ophelia to somewhat Lady Macbeth. You would have, and of course, the way even in Webster, you would have the Duchess of Malfi reacting and bordering on their line of madness. All these are improvisations that were being made by actresses that had become so popular that even Shakespeare couldn't come out. So this part was largely an attempt to show that Shakespeare is perhaps not original. He is somebody who works under his influences, has his own improvisation, and is somebody reacting to a lot of things. And I just talked about the stage performance, talked about the boy performance, and talked about the women characters. So if Shakespeare was doing this, would we not be tempted to do it ourselves? I begin with, I put this please. This is, I'm referring to this all women Turkish group. I can't read it. So, just give me a second. Sultana. She was of the slave origin. Most of the the kings wouldn't be marrying, or they wouldn't be having too many conventional marriages, because that would mean that he would have to owe allegiance to a lot of people other than his own dynasty. So these kind of slave women being picked up, and of course they being kept as concubines were the normative. But they rose in power. Now, these women were not only efficient, they were very efficient in their ruling sensibilities. Cut to, let's say, the 21st century, what was happening in Turkey? Women did not have basic rights. The law of inheritance itself is very problematic. So these were the women. This is a documentary that was, directed by Pelin Eser, or Esmar. Now, Pelin Esmar is a documentary filmmaker herself. Now, what she does is, capture this, women who are moving. If I could show you, these are Thessalian women, aged women. They're sitting, in this sea and taking a dip in the sea. Unthinkable for women of this time. They just can't think of going out or moving around. And it is called, the play that they are performing in these villages is called the Queen Lear. It is not called King Lear. And you have a Roman amphitheater. So therefore the Ottoman Empire, the glory of that Ottoman Empire, and the present. And therefore, this particular scene has a woman character, Zephine, who is playing this Queen Lear, telling that I give my daughters the property. The question is, can a peasant woman in Turkey think about that? She doesn't own anything. You are then making a subtle call for gender equality in a society where gender equality is perhaps non-existent. The main character, Zephine, she says that when she had been younger, she had wanted to be a nurse. But her father said that she would rather be doing goat herding. She would be that, she would have to look after these animals. But of course, she cannot have her own dream. Today, after the performance, she says the future is uncertain, but I have learned to dream. So, a group of Turkish women, peasant women, and I'm talking about a space where perhaps Shakespeare is not, not somebody who can be thought to be a kind of a game changer. So you have this. The next one, that was happening in India. So I talked about this Turkish women who was performing King Lear, to them, this was a call for gender equality, talking about who can give access to property, or who can, say that, I give it to somebody. That is what Lear, Lear's basic question was, he says that, I can give it to anyone. Instead of being a king who unites a kingdom, he is a king who initially begins by breaking the kingdom. So he says, I can literally do that. But there are two things that, definitely can be worked out. One is, of course, this figure of the father, and of course, the gender role that we talked about. There was Rajat Kapoor in India, who performed King Lear, and this was basically, let's say, a monologue. I say basically because there would be few other characters. Now, Lear would be shown in a clownish manner. He has a suitcase, he carries a bottle of water. Basically, a retired man who has given everything that he has to his children. Now he has been driven away from his home. And on this stage, this clownish behavior of his is actually provoking the audience and telling him that you make mockery of every relationship. So if you were talking about the senility, because when Shakespeare was talking about King Lear, an 84-year King Lear, if you are looking at the lifespan of an individual, it was around 55, 60. So people did not know what to do with these people who were older. So basically you go second. But here, it's just a turning where a father has done everything, and then of course he is onto the streets and he's moving around. But this play, when it was adapted in around, let's say, 1930-35, this play itself had a happy end. And this was our country. Because you still thought that you could have misunderstanding with your parents, but they could be reconciled. It is almost in a kind of an irreversible process when it is a play that is being performed around 2015 or 14, where you have this, bipolarization or binaries on a different level altogether. Interestingly, when this play as such would be adapted in Calcutta, let's say in 1860s and then 1910, or even in the 1880s, all of these plays, when adapted in Calcutta on the stage, would have happy endings. So therefore, what I'm trying to say, that the concept or the economy of these relationships are primarily dependent on the cultural circumstances. So when the adaptations have been done, they have responded to that. Okay? I think this is what we do. So, okay. This is what I was trying to show. This is the documentary. All very aged women. So these are basically the women performers. Very little props. This is the dressing. So this is the costume. This amphitheater. The woman sitting is the one who is playing it. The geographical
amazing.
I think basically you've got the idea, isn't it? So that is basically what this. So this is where they are sitting in traditional places, where women have not been performing, let alone performing. They have not been moving through such geographical spaces. next one. Now, this is where I go to Ukraine. Now, Ukraine is somebody we all know, isn't it? It's
Ukraine.
in war with Russia. So perhaps what would be one of the most, I would say, trying times. What does Shakespeare do with his life? Now, again, if I could really show a bit of this document, and this is, a 17-minute kind of a document, we wouldn't go, but basically what is happening, it is called To Be or Not to Be. A group of Shakespearean scholars in Ukraine have come together and they are trying to talk about peace, they are trying to raise money, and they are trying to bring back independence. Now I'll explain how they are doing it. Now Zelensky, he himself while talking to the British Parliament had quoted Shakespeare. The 19th century, when Ukraine would be under Russia, for them, when they came out and they were onto their own, they started to perform Shakespeare. They said, and the scholars here also say, that this was aligning themselves to their Western cultural identity. That they are not Russians. This is a way to actually bring up their identity. And they said, performing Shakespeare is equal to independence. They said, now in a very difficult time, they were initially facing this question that in what language should they perform Shakespeare? Russian, Ukrainian, English, history slangs, which is a combination of, these languages, should they talk about?
Mathematics.
Can you close this? So, this is Ukrainian performance as I was talking about, So they said, this is like, getting our independence. And therefore they said that, if we are able to come back to performing Shakespeare, we will be able to claim that Western cultural identity. That is something that Putin and Russia together are trying to rob us of. One of the scholars, Shakespearean scholars in Ukraine, while doing this documentary, literally breaks down and says that this is an encroachment on our liberty. And they say that we have come together as a group of Shakespearean scholars so that we can talk about the individual identity, that we can talk about our independence. Shakespeare, of course, did not think about this. But this was, pretty recent, and this is, where the scholars had come together. This one, Emoji in the Wild. This is a 2021, exactly a lockdown performance. Now, the earlier, the Ukraine one, To Be or Not to Be, they had framed this word and said to us, this is not the conflict within the mind of Hamlet, but the conflict that we are facing. To be, gaining our independence, or shall we allow ourselves to be overwhelmed? Or will we allow this identity to be thrust on us? So it is just not a physical battle that they are fighting, but as this documentary claims, that it is a cultural crisis, a cultural identity question that they are facing today. And they hope to respond to it through this Shakespeare scholar workshops. And they said, they want to come back to a time when they will be able to go out and perform in Kiev. It could be anywhere in Ukraine, but they say that we want to go back. And they said, places which had been raised, they believe are going to be again Ukraine if Shakespeare is allowed to perform. So this is, the kind of spirit that you could feel. Now this, again, Emoji in the Wild, is a project that was taken down in 2021. I think I'll have to tell a little bit about it. Now this is inspired by the Shakespearean play Cymbeline. Now the play basically, if I say there is a king who is married to a queen, and therefore he has presumably, he knows that his two sons have died, and there is the only daughter Imogen who is alive. Now this evilish queen wants Imogen to get married to Cloten, her son. The agenda happens to be two. The king believes that Imogen cannot marry somebody that she loves because it will not allow the purity of the blood to be retained. And of course, for the queen, through her son, she will have the hegemonic right that she has been trying to control through the king. Of course, there is this escape of Imogen. She goes, and of course, there is where she is. Her character is questioned, and then thereafter, there will come a Roman attack, and of course, there is reconciliation. The brothers are found out, and this is how this list goes. Now, this way, it is being understood through a very anthropological sense. I think you can see this woman character. If at the end of the session, if I can play it, I will play it. She is a woman who is colored. She's not white. And this is, I said this is a performance that was being taken up by this organization, and this was actually being taken up in this wildlife sanctuary in Yosemite. Now this is a huge place where, let's say, today effects of pollution, wildlife conservation and other things are in danger. So what do you really show here? You actually show that there is a mayor of California, who is going into a contract which is going to compromise this wildlife. And this compromise of this wildlife would mean that all the ecosystem, everything would be jeopardized. So as Imogen travels, they just give you a small, background. If you look at this film, this is a 90-minute film. So if you look at it, just a small prelude where they will say that, how does Imogen get to the forest. Thereafter, they move you through various locales. Now the question is, why was this not performed on stage? They said that if they performed in stage, the way that they are able to make Imogen move through various wildlife ecology and show where things are disturbing, they will not be able to show it on the stage. And therefore, it is actually something which has been shot over 6 days in this whole ecological system of Yosemite. And then, of course, they said that it is to talk about the damaging effect. In the pandemic, they were talking about healing the world. This was an aftermath of the report where there was closure for about 2 or 3 months, and it was realized that the earth was beginning to heal. So it brought about a potential question that, leave the world to itself, leave it to its own process, it will help us. So a message, a play like Cymbeline, which I would say is not a very popular Shakespeare play, was being used in this anthropological sense to convey this particular idea. This was a typical case of the lockdown. Now, this is once again. Now, what I had talked about was gender. Then I was talking about, let's say, the concept of independence through Shakespeare. Then I was saying that, okay, there was anthropology. I'm going back a little. So, I'm not really taking a journey from here, but rather from here. This is a 1987 performance of Othello. And this was in South Africa. And this person is John Hunt. Now, why would this be problematic? Now, in the Arden edition of Shakespeare, I think this was 1980. The editor went on to write, I saw a Negro bus conductor and I thought he was handsome enough to be Othello. You have seen Aladdin, that is of Will Smith. Will Smith still continues to be this day. So somebody who is the hero is still with a certain features. That is something which has to be broken. Now this Aladdin history is also problematic, but that is not perhaps our concern. Now John Carney said, when I was to perform, they said, I don't like you because of who you are, not because you are black. And therefore that is where the problem lay. John Carney wrote a kind of an autobiography, and he said that, when everybody was asked that, what are you performing? They said, I am performing Yago. Somebody said, I am performing this. But when it came to me, they said that this merchant organization wants you to play Othello. So he could not say that I am playing Othello. If you look at the history of performances, major performances of Othello, you would say most of them would be white men. They would be colored. So therefore, for the white audience, this was a comfort that the white man and white woman were actually romancing on stage. It was not that. So much so, John Carney said some of the South African Shakespeare scholars and professors came together and said that there is no proof in the play that the marriage of Othello and Desdemona was consummated. Which is that? And Carney said, what are you saying? And what makes you say that? What does proof mean? And the white woman actress, who went on to play, asked Carney and said that you hold my waist. You hold me because that is the discomfort that you want to give. And this was happening 2 years after in South Africa when black and white marriage was legalized. Color marriages or marriages were not allowed. This was legalized. And there was a discomfort. So he said you have to make these people uncomfortable. And therefore the mayor had actually sent a group of people and said, what is happening here? This is apartheid, this is 1987, Mandela in prison, there is bloodshed, violence, everything. Why is Othello being performed? Why is this racial play being performed? Carney said this was a part of the movement, and the white audience who sang literally rebelled in their sin. They were uncomfortable. And when the mayor asked, did they not perform Shakespeare? Because it was, if there were adaptation, rewritings, reworkings, they were doing. But how performance itself was becoming, a rework. And they said, no, it was okay. But they were uncomfortable. Then, the white lady who went on to this play of Janet Sussman, went on to play Desdemona. She had 8 messages. She was given 8 replies, and then she shifted to Australia. Carney said that, after the apartheid, when I met her in Australia, and I asked her, how are you? She said, I don't get mainstream roles because of that one performance. Because she had performed, the white Desdemona to an actual black man, this was a marginalization that was being done. The question is, how black is Othello? How black can you allow him to be? And there was this one gesture in the play when Brabantio is talking to Othello. He has, a pet dog, and he has a bone in hand, and he says, look o moon, and he just throws it, of course to the pet, but making that gesture itself is a sign that, okay, you're a dog. You get, you are not allowed to be an insider. And if you look at the political situation when Othello was being written, what was happening? You could not have anyone from the Venetian family or from this aristocratic families to actually become a general. You needed an outsider. You needed somebody to protect you. But then this protector becoming the predator is an idea that is being thought about. And then through the ages, performances of Othello have always questioned this idea of raciality. There was this one German performance where there was this white man once again who was, darkened up, and by the time Desdemona crawls or nails on her body, the white patch comes out. Talking about the fact that this what we are talking about. We are talking about Othello being the attacker. If that is an idea that you want to be, it could be a black man, it could be a white man. It has nothing to do with color. So these were definitely coming up. And for Kane, this is a passage that I want to read from his autobiography. They said I was the first black man who looked them in the eye as an equal, and I told them I will always be in the majority. I was fully aware of the inherent risks in playing this role in apartheid in South Africa. But for me, it was an invitation I couldn't refuse. So this was again. Another play that
Macbeth.
I think this is where we will move on to this. But another play that is equally problematic is Hamlet. But this time, I would want to go to the Middle East, Arabia. Hamlet and the idea of censorship. Now, when we first talked about what you call Shakespeare, and we talked about gender, how is Hamlet included? To the Western world, Hamlet is what? The ache of the intellectual man. But beyond that, perhaps Hamlet doesn't represent anything else in the Western world. But what is happening elsewhere? Now this performance in 1967, just at the beginning of what would be the Arabian nationalism, and this would be the governance of Nasir progressive government in Egypt, and of course where the Arabian world, the Egyptian world was trying to claim its equality with the West. Because if I say progress, you still talk about in terms of the West. You don't seem to think anything else. So this was Litwin. She argued that Hamlet became a revolutionary in this world. He was a righter of wrongs, and the to be or not to be is not the hesitance that was downplayed, but it was trying to talk about autocratic government. It was trying to talk about through Hamlet, about these performances. One of these adaptation, post this Nazi government, and of course once again the lapse into this I would say not non-democratic, but a more censorship places. In 1984, you would have Jawad al-Asiri, an Iraqi living in exile in Jordan. He said when he was taking up Hamlet, he wasn't giving it any kind of a suspense. Like Hamlet throughout the play wonders, his father was killed by Claudio. There is a witness. Ophelia had seen Claudio murder the king. But there cannot be justice. Hamlet cannot get justice because there is a witness. Because there will be no judge, there is no jury, there is nothing that can make you up and say that I want justice. Almost talking about the Saddam Hussein-like figures. Where of course justice was very one-sided. If this person thought, the ruler thought that this was justice, then it was justice. But there was nothing called a legal system. So this world is trying through Hamlet to show that his sword is mightier than the king. They're talking about this censorship, that if you write, we are not able to do anything. You probably cannot help anything to happen. There was again in this Arabian world, this play Hamlet and Macbeth were brought together. Almost like, let's say, Waiting for Godot, Vladimir and Estragon talking. A kind of an existentialist world. Now what was happening? Now there is this particular passage where you could see Hamlet talking about a crisis. They are both of them talking, and the crisis of belonging. This is a crisis of a nation. What is their cultural identity? That is what this play, which has Macbeth and Hamlet together, trying to do. So there is this dialogue, where Macbeth said, If I had legs, I would become the captain of the national team. My players would wear blue, red and white stripes and we would. It stopped. Hamlet says, but that's the French flag. And then Macbeth is angry and he says the French flag. The French flag, you don't see anything but the French flag? Yet, have you got any idea what the color of your own flag is? Is it possible that you have gone so downhill since the fall of Granada, since the arrival of the colonists? French flag. Then, where our ancestors used to live as conquerors, as civilized people, as masters, and looking us returning as street sweepers, cleaners, thieves, traffickers, prostitutes, and we are beaten up. French flag. And while the slaughterers go on, what do? You paint and you paint. Saints, signs and color. Color. Do you know what color means? So this anger, this is a play which is talking about the Moroccan world. Where the question of national identity, the colonial machine has almost run over it. So this is where it becomes hugely problematic. You feel this kind of a tension in these characters. Now this is close up. I'm talking about the performance of Ratan Taya. Now what is happening here? In an interview, this was given in 2014, I read Ratan Taya. Macbeth to me represents a disease of uncontrollable greed for wealth and power, a product of the corrupt mind which affects not only the individual and family members, but the entire society. This is the world we live in, all infected or to be infected by this disease, which wraps our vision and makes us believe we know the world. The Macbeth disease destroys our spiritual balance and leads to violence, as it does not only in Manipur and other parts of India, but all over the world. Now, very colorful performance, and you don't think Macbeth can be done that way. Now, this is the letter, a long scroll of hieroglyphics that would be read by Lady Macbeth, and she's reading this letter. Now, why is this so long? It is trying to say that ambition is unending. And this is a play which excludes the murder of Macduff. It does. And then you will find that there is, in this particular play, a number of Macbeths. Look at this. All of them on wheelchairs. And there are nurses. Then finally all the nurses come together and throw Macbeth out. A disease being cleansed. And this is coming from where? Coming from the northeast, where let's say you are talking about your own political situation. You have a problem with who is ruling you. Khayyam is not very, very confrontative, but he definitely has this in mind. You will see that there is another thing. Apart from this, the multiple Macbeths signify that Macbeth can be anyone and a disease. And the most hair-raising thing that all the nurses coming, there is somebody who should cure, who should be your protector. The nurses themselves are pushing Macbeth, throwing him out. Now this is definitely problematic. Of course, if you look at the history of Manipur, what is happening here? It's a geographical seclusion. After independence, let's say in 1947, it saw the military front which was coming up. There was insurgency in the 1960s. 80s, there was revolutionary and counter-revolutionary movement, where, of course, regular public theatre was becoming the space of opium. Otherwise, where would you go? There's no other places that you could go. So in the 70s, this was happening. Now, if this is what Ratan Taya was doing, there is an interesting aspect, There is an interesting aspect that is being done by Lokendra Aragal. Now, he was staging the stage of blood, again an adaptation of Macbeth. Now, he doesn't start Macbeth from the beginning, but from the end. And this was performed not on a stage, but on a raft that was made on the Lotak Lake, and then it was also performed on the banks of the river Thames. You push Macbeth into the water, and of course, the rising of the character of the Macbeth is also from the water. There are not 3 witches, but 7 witches. The 7 main themes. The cultural resonance. And there is only one character or one person who plays the man and woman. There is a belt which is worn by the character. So when the belt is open, and it just goes like this, it is a woman. And when it is tied in a belt, it is a man. Now what is it trying to prove? Ambition has no gender. Even women can be ambitious. So that resonance of that ability of Macbeth or Lady Macbeth, where we have stopped short and said that Lady Macbeth could be but cannot. You just explore that. And it is Aragon's father in 1986, he again had adapted, 1936, had adapted this play Macbeth as Bhavya. Duncan does not die yet, Macbeth dies. A king is able to establish good rule. In the 90s, his son has lost faith in that very governance. So look how they are responding differently than to this particular play. And if you just go back a little bit, you will also have, the Shakespeare moving back, even the Parsees. Now I'm talking about the Parsees because they have been sort of, the cultural contribution is something that we don't acknowledge, okay? And they were the people, who were definitely performing Shakespeare. One play that I would like to mention is called Nakari Firangazi Tekhani Abi, which means a bad European woman brought to sense. Staining of Vishnu. This is interesting. Why? If you look at the time, the early 20th century, what was happening? You were having a lot of books which were being written with the intent of guiding young minds. Dr.Madhumita Majumder writes it, who would be the Koka or who should be the Koka? Now you are answering such questions. So therefore, and if you look at representations of women in literature, especially in India in the early 20th century, she is either the suffering one, Sharachandra Balma, or she is the Gaucha, dying, somebody who knows black magic, somebody who is evil. Okay, so therefore, here, the use of the title, at the same time it is talking about that kind of womanhood, women need to be controlled, but it doesn't hurt the male ego and nationalism because you are talking about this through, a European way. Now this is a very ancient strategy. So when you would have Roman communists being written, they would be based in Greek. So it would be like, it's not happening here. It's happening to those people, but it is a corrective one. So it's almost on that kind of a level. Also, the innovations. In 12th night, what happens? There is a shipwreck, but here you are showing that Viola and Sebastian are traveling by train. The train collides and it falls into the water, and they are separated. So this kind of changes. And this is a time, since I was talking about Othello, this is also a time in 1848, the Bengali actor Vaishnav Charan Ordo, who was playing the unpainted nigger in Othello. Kane does it in 1987, and of course is talking about it, but in 1848, you were talking about this. So this plays slowly would fall into what is known as farcical. At the end of it, how they, this culture sort of went away. You would have something which is called Hamlet or No More. Manchu Macbeth, 1970s, 80s. You are not trying to present tragedy. The presenting tragedy was becoming increasingly problematic. Why? You have had independence. The 1970s was also a time of war, emergencies. The 80s was talking about what a resonance of hope. You have the Asian Games and others. It was trying to present a different India. So you were also trying to dramatically change the perception in the way that you are looking at it. So Macbeth is not that dangerous as a rule. So all these things keep on happening. Now this is what I was talking about, the Hamlet in Arab, this Arab dresses, they would have such pictures of politicians and of the juxtaposition. So this, you're taking Hamlet to be the Prince of Arabia. Okay? Finally, I would want to end with Ahad Raza Mir's Hamlet, a ghost story. Now this is something, he's a Pakistani who is living in Canada. He says, in my audience, there are a lot of Pakistanis who are coming, who are trying to talk about identity, who are questioning independence, who are questioning the notion of censorship. How much can I talk? How much am I allowed? What would be, this governance doing to me? How much will I allow myself to be, trapped in it? And, he was asked, after a performance, do you want to take it to your home country, Pakistan? He said, one day I would want. Because, he said, it will speak of many voices in my country. Now, what was happening then, I'm trying to say the performances that are usually chosen are not exactly Western performances, excepting for, Imogen in the Wild, which is of course the University of California's adaptations. Apart from that, I was mostly choosing, non-Western performances, where I am saying, look at the appropriation, where Macbeth becomes a disease, where Hamlet does not become a man conflicted about, what to do and what not to do, but he's somebody who's becoming the voice of, response, who brings out conflicts, who is provocative, who is asking questions, and of course, who is aware of who is the culprit. The question is, can you pin the culprit? Can you actually, bring the person to that position? So, these performances, and of course, the performances of Macbeth, once again, in a non-Western country where you show the witches as rag collectors. রাস্তায় যেতে গেলে কাউকে ধরো তুমি যাচ্ছ একটা দিকে 10 টাকা দিয়ে দিলে খুব ব্লেস করো, তারপরে ধরো কেউ যাচ্ছে সে আরেকটু টাকা দিয়ে দিল, এবার তো তোমাকে যা বলেছে তো সেটা বলা যায় না, so therefore something else, so that idea, that why was Macbeth told that and why was Banquo told that, and of course the witches being shown as trees. So the nature being an external manifestation, what nature becoming corrupt, being corrupted by us, will tell us corruptness. So Macbeth hears what he wants to hear, and Banquo is the typical, if I can use that word, middle class father who wants me to love his children, celebrate your country. So therefore he hears of his son. So these multiple resonances, these multiple ideas only crop up because of cultural spaces. And as I was talking about Dr. Arakan, when this performance was watched by somebody who was a journalist who was sent on behalf of the Guardian, he said, I don't know if this is Shakespeare, but then I'm sure Shakespeare would have been damn proud of what he saw. That makes Shakespeare be in our lives always.